Okay, welcome back everyone to the Muslim Glory podcast. My name is Raisa Ghazi. Today I'm talking about Islam in Indonesia, and this is part 2 because last time I already talked a little bit about it, gave you a short intro about Indonesia, told you a little bit about the occupation of the Dutch in Indonesia, but also the occupation of imperialists worldwide and how they copy-paste basically the same type of method everywhere. Okay, now I just told you a little bit about it, but I'm gonna go deeper into it because basically I'm really obsessed with the story of Indonesians. And yeah, Indonesians, I told you about the Padri War, which is very inspiring, right? The Padri War is about how the Padri side and the Adat actually came together in Islam. They, committed themselves to following the more purified Islam rather than the pre-Islamic Islam, which was not the pre-Islamic, the Islam which included pre-Islamic methods and rituals, because they wanted to fight the occupier. Did I actually put on the timer? Because I have a lot of problems just talking. Yes, because I talk too much. Okay. Anyways. So what we're going to talk about next is I already told you a little bit how, the Dutch are so afraid of the Muslims throughout history. They've always tried to forcefully convert Muslims. They've tried to prosecute Muslims. They've tried to unalive them. And they've also, incited hate in the Muslim community. For example, in this Padri War that I mentioned, the Dutch came in, they wanted to create more conflict between the two sides, started, supporting the side that was less Islamic. They were still gambling, they were still drinking alcohol, they were still doing drugs, and I'm not sure about the drugs, but anyways, they were still doing bad things that were harmful for themselves, and the Dutch wanted to support them. And they started this campaign against the other side, saying, they are the extremists, you should fight them. Alhamdulillah, actually these two parties came together in Islam and they fought and they overwon. They've won the war against the Dutch. Okay, anyways. The Dutch, they had a very problematic presence in Indonesia, I would say, where they were very calculated about the way that they were trying to occupy the lands and exploit the people. And at that time, it's funny because when I read about these things, I can see very clearly that these occupiers were more openly fighting Islam than they are today. Today, I would say that most occupiers are carrying a lot of these false flag missions to hurt Muslims. And then, for example, say that Muslims are the ones who are extremists in non-Muslim countries. Or when Muslims get attacked, they pretend other Muslims attacked them. That's what occupiers do nowadays. Back in the day, they were a little bit less, I would say, calculated about it. For example, the Indonesians, they would openly be subjected to these tactics by their colonizer, their occupier, which were meant to weaken them. For example, the Dutch tried to use Hajj for political reasons. They were offering it to Indonesian leaders who would submit to them as an occupier. Mashallah, the Indonesians rejected. Okay? Another thing they would do is the Indonesians who were in Mecca and couldn't receive money anymore from their family members in Indonesia to continue their studies because the Dutch blocked it. The Dutch would say, okay, we will give you money if you accept us as your leaders. The Indonesians rejected it. Okay. Another thing the Dutch would do to, squirm their way into the Muslim community and, create conflict, weaken them, and to exploit them is the Dutch would go to Saudi Arabia and they were trying to put political influence on the sheikhs there who were guiding Hajj visitors. And so they would say to the Saudis who were there guiding the Indonesians, if you start to influence the people who are doing pilgrimage and say this and this and this to them, that would be very, very beneficial to us. But they also rejected that. Another example, right, of how Muslims worldwide, not just the Indonesians, they went there even to Mecca to try to campaign against, the Indonesians. And the Dutch did that. And it didn't work because the Muslims were standing united. And that's how you overcome occupation. The Dutch were being very sneaky, trying to sabotage Muslims, using Islam to blackmail Indonesians, dedicated Muslims. They were trying to say to them, you can only do Hajj if you accept our leadership. You can only do this if you accept our leadership. At some point, the Dutch even banned Hajj. It was not accessible for Indonesians anymore to punish them. And that should tell you a lot about how much they feared the Islam in Indonesia. Because for them, it wasn't just bullying the Indonesians, okay? It wasn't just bullying Indonesians by taking away something that means so much to them. It was also about making sure they couldn't go to the Holy Land and get, knowledge and get educated. And so that's what the Dutch would do. They wanted to, if the Indonesians would go to Saudi Arabia, they wanted to control the process. They wanted to control the shipping. They wanted to control how they were doing Hajj, performing Hajj, how they were being guided by the Saudis. They wanted to influence everything by, shoving down these narratives down the throats of Indonesians. But Indonesians were strong, mashallah. They were smart, mashallah. They weren't like, oh, I need a little bit of money. Let me take that money. No, they weren't like the leaders, weren't like, oh, I want to get more power. Let me accept, this offer by the Dutch and then betray my own people. No. They were not like that. And that's why I am such a fan of them. They're so, they're inspirational. They're example. They're role models. They should be role models to Muslims worldwide. Okay. Anyways, one thing that's really difficult nowadays is that because there's so many fake narratives about Muslims that are being pushed, a lot of Muslims don't know anymore, what to believe. Like sometimes it's like even these media outlets who pretend to be, with the Muslims. They talk about Palestine. They talk about, the oppression of Muslims here and there. But then here and there, they'll also throw in, some type of like propaganda against the Muslims. And that's something that I think Muslims need to be very aware of. Not everyone who looks like they are your friend is your friend. You need to think, okay? And I get so tired of Muslims online when I see you attacking each other based on these dumbass articles written by actual non-Muslims, and then you go around attack Muslims. You attack Muslims based on the words of a non-Muslim who's lying makes me nauseous. It makes me nauseous. That's what I can tell you. Okay. Anyways, this is what I wanted to tell you about Mecca. And I just think it's so cool. I think the whole thing is so cool. And here's another thing that really came to my mind though, and which obviously I read here as well. I read an article about Indonesians in Mecca by this Turkish, I think it was a Turkish lecturer or professor. And he basically talked about, the significance of Mecca for Indonesians. And one thing he also described was that how, there was obviously so much controversy around Indonesians going to Mecca because the Dutch were trying to block it. But at the same time, the Indonesians were also trying to, campaign in Mecca to, get the Saudis and get all the other Indonesians to become one front against the occupiers. What I think is I would say it's beautiful about Mecca though, and in Saudi Arabia, is that they didn't allow this type of political campaigning going on in Mecca. Okay. Because it is a holy city. It's a country that also has its distinct, relationships with other countries. And so for them, they cannot be pulled into every war just because, they're a holy city as well. And so at that time, the Indonesians did try to do that. They did try to campaign inside Mecca, but it was not allowed. And it did remind me of the situation we have nowadays with the Palestinians as well, where a lot of people try to criticize, Mecca, where they will say, oh, we're not allowed to go in there with flags. We're not allowed to do interviews around the Kaaba. And we're not allowed to hold signs in front of the Kaaba and say oh, free Palestine. I'm like, that to me is so, I find it dumb. I'm so sorry to say, I find that so dumb that Muslims are trying to, shade Saudi like that. Because first of all, it's always been like that. Like, you cannot do political campaigns in the Holy City. It's not allowed, okay? The second thing is, imagine you are in the house of Allah. You are in the actual house of Allah. You can put your head on the floor and ask Allah for everything in this world. But instead, you decided to turn your back on the Kaaba, and then you were being filmed by your friends and you hold up a sign, you're like, Free Palestine. Are you crazy? Like, are you actually crazy? I think that's the most embarrassing thing I've ever seen. It also just shows, this mentality we have where we think if we have a social media following, we can change the world. If we have a lot of people respecting me or liking me or I have popularity, we can change the world. No, sweetie. Put your head on the ground. Ask Allah in humility to do something for you. That was some craziness I realized when I read that. And I was like, ugh, we humans, we really deteriorated from, I don't know. I mean, it was happening at the time as well. They were trying to campaign in Mecca, so it's not something new. But still, guys, we gotta do better. We really gotta do better, okay? Anyways, okay, I wanted to tell you something interesting, by the way. Okay, listen. In this Padri war, I already told you this war is I'm mesmerized by it because, one thing that's very distinct, and it's just, this is the copy paste of the occupier, okay? They were calling the Padris, they were calling them Wahhabis, okay? They were calling them Wahhabis as in using the word Wahhabi as a slur to indicate that these people are out of their mind. They're dangerous, okay? And this word, I didn't even know the word Wahhabi, honestly, until I started creating content online, I think. But basically, Wahhabi is like the purified Islam where they say you cannot pray to a grave. I don't know. Apparently it had to be said. You cannot pray to a grave. You shouldn't do certain celebrations that aren't really Islamic. They're trying to keep Islam as pure as it is. It is the only unedited religion that is left in this world. I mean, we should be preserving it, right? But what happened is that these occupiers like the Dutch, but also the Soviets, they started getting involved by creating tension amongst us Muslims, right? And so one of the things they did is create the slur Wahhabi. I know in the Netherlands they do it as well. The term Wahhabi is actually, it's almost considered an organization that's extremist or something. But anyway, Wahhabi basically just means purified Islam. You just follow the Sunnah, you follow the Quran. Okay, alhamdulillah, if I could, I would. But then I started looking into this history of Wahhabi because it came here in this whole Indonesia story. It came up again, Wahhabi is used as a negative thing. I didn't know it was a negative thing. I don't see it as a negative thing. Never read it in Islamic literature that it's a negative thing. Anyways, this Wahhabi thing, it goes back a while. Let me see. Where was it used again? Okay, so the Soviets started using this Wahhabi term also in their, territories because they wanted to make sure that Islam wasn't going to rise. People weren't going to unify in Islam. And so the term Wahhabi, for example, in Uzbekistan was used to indicate a person who was reading Quran, a person who was praying, a person who was covering up. That was considered a Wahhabi, okay? And so this term was ordinary Muslims were now being called a Wahhabi. And again, it became a political thing because even if Muslims would go to a mosque and the mosque would not be registered with the government, they would be called a Wahhabi. Well, guess what? Guess how one of these mosques would be able to register with the government? If they would pledge their alliance with their occupiers. And so again, Islam is being used as a political tool, especially when it comes to this word Wahhabi. And I've seen Muslims use the term Wahhabi against each other, but you have to understand, Wahhabi is a slur invented by occupiers to indicate a person who prays, a person who read Quran, a person who covers up. Okay, that's what they're trying to say is a Wahhabi, and they're trying to make it sound like this is a group of people that's dangerous. But actually, Muslims are supposed to pray. Muslims are supposed to read Quran, and we are supposed to be modest in our speech, in our dressing, in our, everything that we do. If you've been someone, and I know a few of the people following me love to throw around the term Wahhabi. If you've done that, you gotta repent. You gotta repent, girl, because that's not something, it's not acceptable. Like, why are you letting yourself be brainwashed by your occupier anyways? Like, that is the ultimate weakness. Like, you're a weak person if you're letting yourself be brainwashed by the occupier, because like, you have a religion that's so clear, it's so kind, it's so peaceful, and you're literally letting yourself be brainwashed by your occupier. I'm sorry, but I cannot. Ooh, I have 10 minutes left. Anyways, there's only 2 things I want to discuss. I just want to go and have breakfast, to be honest. Like, I've been on the road since like 6:45 and I arrived here around 9. Okay. I was in traffic for like 2 hours, and my day, it's 10 a.m. now, and I have a day that's going to extend till 10 p.m. Anyways, I have to tell you 2 more things. Okay. The first one is, okay, look, there's another thing that was brought to my attention, and this is a serious thing. Okay. Did you know about the Ahmadiyyas, like a sect, a Muslim sect? Look, someone brought it to my attention before I started preparing this podcast. I read a little bit about it. I was like, okay, it's not really relevant to this story. Turns out it is relevant to this story. I found out that in the Netherlands, the first mosque that was allowed to be built was an Ahmadiyya mosque. And that was like, to me, so suspicious. The Dutch, who literally did forced conversions, the Dutch who literally did like prosecutions, the Dutch who literally like banned Hajj in Indonesia, they were building a mosque, and it was an Ahmadiyya mosque. I was like, let me look a little bit closer into this. When I look into that, I'm going to be honest with you, the history of Ahmadiyyas is kind of crazy. Officially, they're not even considered Muslims. Ahmadiyyas basically believe that their founder was the promised Messiah. In another stream of this group, they believe he was a prophet even. Okay, this is crazy. But then the Ahmadiyyas, they would say, no, he is the promised Messiah, and he's comparable to Isa alayhi salam. Weird. Was his mom, like, did she give birth to him without consent? Like, doesn't make sense. They think that Isa alayhi salam came to India and died there. The thing that made them mega suspicious to me is, okay, first of all, the Dutch allowed them to build a mosque in the Netherlands. Mega suspicious. Secondly, the founder worked with the British in India. Okay. His family was being paid by the British. He admitted they got paid, retirement plans, everything. Mega suspicious. Okay, mega suspicious. Okay. He extensively praised also the royals. By the way, as an Indian, I don't even get that. Like, dude, weren't Indians like totally destroyed by the British? Like, I don't even understand. Okay, anyways, he talks very negatively about Mecca, Medina. And then the final thing I'm gonna tell you, I have a whole list, by the way, but their Middle Eastern headquarters are in Israel. Like, I literally, that's all you need to know about them. And so that to me already shows like, this is not good. They're just always in the pockets of people who hate Islam. Like, how is that possible? How can you then still be a Muslim? It doesn't make sense. Like, even Islamically speaking, like, you cannot be an ally of the person who turns his back against Islam, who tries to destroy him. Crazy. Anyways, what is really concerning about them is that they're the fastest growing, you know, non-Muslims would say they're a Muslim sect. I mean, they're not considered Muslims according to Muslims, but they're growing really fast according to their statistics. And the reason why, I'm going to tell you the reason why, is because they are selling a watered down version of Islam. They're saying you don't have to pray 5 times a day. They're saying you don't have to fast during Ramadan. Everything is about your intention. If you mean well, you can drink. If you mean well, you can do. That's not Islam. Like, I don't understand that. The thing is, why it's interesting to me is because in Suriname, where my family is from, this is also a huge thing, Ahmadiyyas. And I'm just like not surprised that these occupiers like the Netherlands and the UK would want to support them, because obviously they're thinking this is how we can weaken the spirit of Muslims. I think this is crazy. Anyways, you know, the Dutch already have a really suspicious background when it comes to Muslims. So for them to then start promoting this branch of Muslims who do not believe you need to be, you know, following the word of Allah, it says everything to me. Anyways, someone on IG got a little bit angry when I said that. And they said that I shouldn't talk about it. Like, it was a little bit intimidating. He said I should stay quiet about it and that only Allah could judge them and I'm not Allah. And basically, he told me to educate myself. And then he gave me the website of their, you know, movement in Dutch. And basically, it confirmed everything that other people were saying as well. And so that was not a great move. You know, everything that was negative about them, they confirmed it on their website. You can read it yourself if you want. Like, they're literally just saying, you know, this thing that a lot of Muslims do, like, Islam is in my heart. Like, I don't really have to follow the rules because Islam is in my heart. You know, you're a good Muslim if Islam is in your heart. Like, that's not really Islam though. Like, maybe other religions do that and it's good enough, but in Islam, you are actually held accountable, and that's why it is a strong religion. That's why Muslims are, when they are practicing, very strong. Not because they feel it in their heart, because they're actually putting it into practice. Anyways, the thing that I also found really suspicious is that this leader, he went to Europe in 1924. He did a tour in Europe. That's what I found. He did a tour in Europe, and then 1 year later, the Ahmadiyyas arrived in Indonesia. So basically, my perception of this is, you know, the Dutch maybe met them in Europe, because I do know one Dutch woman also converted to their sect. And a year later, they were pushing this branch in Indonesia. Why? Why would the Dutch do that when they're so against Muslims? Why would they not support this branch? It says everything to me, to be honest. And yeah, that's the thing. That's I think all we need to know about them. Okay. Is there anything else I wanted to tell you? Okay, there was one little thing. Oh, I have 3 minutes left. Ooh. Okay, anyways. What did I have left to say? Okay, look, I just wanted to mention one more thing about this Ahmadiyya group, because I do think it's very concerning that this is actually growing. And like this week, I was having conversations on my Instagram about, you know, why is there weakness within the Muslim community, you know, amongst the men, but also amongst the women. And I basically made a case for wearing modest wear. I think that it is something that contributes to social cohesion, right? And I have to say, you know, sometimes people on Instagram, like, you really disappoint me, because basically, when I made this point about, you know, Islam promoting modesty, there were women who were like saying to me, you know, men should lower their gaze. You know, this is like this thing. I just noticed that a lot of women, especially women from the West, they love to say this. They'll say, oh, why should I dress modestly? Men should lower their gaze. But it's like, these men aren't telling you to dress modestly. Allah is telling you to dress modestly. So I don't know who you're talking to, but like Allah told it to you. You don't have to go into discussion with any man, tell them how to behave. Allah also told them how to behave. So you don't have to do that. But the thing is, like, it's such a feminist trope, in my opinion, as well, because they're making it all about like the male gaze and the sexualization of your body. But actually, Islam is like a bit more encompassing than that, right? Like, it's not just about the male gaze. It's about social cohesion. I mean, there's this story where I think the Prophet, peace be upon him, said to his wives who were walking around in front of a blind man without covering up, like, you should still cover up. And so this thing of like making it about the male gaze is just in one story debunked. Like, it is not about the male gaze. It's about social cohesion. And it's funny because a lot of people, they need to rationalize the religion of Islam, right? A lot of Muslims nowadays, they need to have scientific proof to believe something is right. And so a lot of people, they disregarded modesty because they're like, I'm better than that. I know better than that. But even in scientific research now, they found the concept of, I think it's called encoded cognition. In scientific research, they found the concept called encoded cognition. And it means that the way you dress affects the way that you behave. If you dress modestly, okay, chances are you will be behaving in a way that is more modest. If you're dressing like, obviously this research is only being used in the Western world to, get more money. They're like, if you dress like a successful person, you'll get more money. Let's talk about it in the perspective of being of caring about society. Because if you care about society, you would want to know, how should you dress to make sure that there's social cohesion? It would be modesty. It would be in a way that you don't draw attention, that you don't cause, social unrest. That would be the way to dress, to talk, to walk, and behave. And so this is a thing that I like to remind women on my social media of, like, we as Muslims, we should know better. If Allah says it and there is no scientific research to prove it, there will be in 20 years. And if it won't be, it's also fine. Literally, Islam as submission is perfect. And we really need to start accepting that, because the reason why these movements like Ahmadiyya are getting more foot on the ground is because Muslims themselves are starting to water down religion. And it doesn't make sense. The things you're saying don't make sense. Yeah? I mean, we're fasting because it's good for you. You're praying because it's good for you. You're staying away from alcohol because it's good for you. For you to rationalize it and think like, I'm better than that, it doesn't make sense to me. Anyways, a final thought I wanted to share with you. The propaganda against Indonesia is still ongoing. If you look at, the way they're reporting in the Netherlands about Indonesia, it's always about extremism in Islam. One of the articles I read was like how even Muslims are trying to control people in the bedroom. That's what it was called. Like, super supposedly like controversial title. What it was about is that a few years ago, they made adultery or like cheating in a relationship, they made it punishable. Not like death, just punishable. And I'm like, you're literally gonna criticize a country for trying to install measures against cheating? You know what I find weird? That if you don't pay 50% taxes in the Netherlands, you go to jail. I find that weird. I find it weird that that's the only thing you're going to jail for in general. I mean, I was looking up statistics like child abuse, for example, sexually assaulting a child. 75% of the time, the Dutch only go to jail for 1 day. In Indonesia, you're gonna get, okay, ooh, so extreme. I'm like, what are we even talking about? They will literally try to, twist and turn everything just to make them look bad. And that's the thing that I find so frustrating about media, the political incentives behind media, the motives to keep control. And I think one thing that we all need to know is that Indonesia is they have, I think, one of the largest mines in copper and gold in the world. Okay. And so if you want to know why there's still a focus on Indonesia as a country and trying to, create this narrative about them being extremists, it's because their mines are still being controlled by the West. I think it's like Grasberg mine is one of the biggest ones. It's being controlled by the West. And so there will always be an incentive for imperialists to talk badly about them, especially because they're Muslims, especially because they're strong Muslims, the biggest Muslim country in the world. I don't know if you know, but Ahmadiyya is actually not allowed in the country, mashallah. They're really trying to hold on to the faith, and I really respect that. Okay, this was the end of my podcast. I cannot believe how quickly I had to go through it again. I only did like a small part of research, and then I started yapping. Anyways, I apologize for that. But, so thank you for watching again. Please tune in next week and make sure to sign up for the Speak Out course. If you want to become a public speaker like me and you want to work internationally, get hired to travel everywhere and do speeches about whatever you're an expert at, could be HR, technology, wellness, you name it, technology, and you could do it. You could turn it into a job where you're a public speaker around the world. Okay. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time.